This article that I'm gonna read to you was sent to me by Astarte Jones, excuse me. And it's been a while since I've done a reparations type video, but I was trying to see whether or not I was going to talk about this. But after reading through some of it, I said I have to address this yet again. And it's the usual suspects as usual who are bringing this up. And it's these foreign born black individuals who are using, who are literally have put themselves in the position of being like the puppet for the quote unquote dominant society. Now, this article I'm going to read to you is entitled "Why Reparations Talk is Harmful," and it's coming from the National Review. And ironically, the article I'm looking at, the picture that it has on there is of Ta-Nehisi Coates, another person who is against the reparations. No surprise there. It says, it divides Americans along racial and within racial groups. It says 3 Democratic candidates for president, Julian Castro, Cory Booker, and Marianne Williamson, have declared support for the idea of slavery reparations. Well, first of all, I don't know why Cory Booker is even a discussion. Never mind, I'm not going to get into that. Have declared support. Okay. A number of others have said they'd vote for a bill sponsored by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee to create a commission to study and develop reparations proposals for African Americans. Still, other candidates have been vague, such as Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, and Beto O'Rourke, while Elizabeth Warren has called for national full-blown conversations about reparations in this country. Oh, a conversation. A Washington Post piece examining the tensions between black Americans on the question offers a glimpse of why this idea is terrible. It's a profile of William A. Sandy Darity, a professor of economics at Duke and leader of the Planning Committee for African Americans, who can 1, prove that they are descended from someone enslaved in the United States, and 2, have identified as black in public documents for at least 10 years. This, as you can imagine, has engendered some raised eyebrows. It's extremely difficult to separate classes of black people. Objects. Nkechi Taifa, a DC activist per the Post, who supports the idea of reparations for all black people. Sorry about that. The idea that unless you can actually trace your family directly to a slave, that you haven't been subject to the legacy of slavery is a bunch of hogwash. Did you just hear what that person said? And this is another foreign-born black person saying that. I'm trying to figure out how in the hell did they insert themselves into this conversation that has nothing to do with them. And we've said before that whatever we get, because it's supposed to be a lot, it will eventually trickle down to them. But you know what? The way that they're acting right now, I'm actually glad that it is, because say that we do get reparations, I'm on the level of now withholding my shit from them because they have turned themselves into some ungrateful bastards. Spoiled brats. There it is, the ticking time bomb of intra-group resentment that reparation talks ignites. About 10% of black Americans today are foreign born. The number of blacks who are children and grandchildren of immigrants from Africa and the Caribbean is even larger and includes some outstanding achievers, including Malcolm Gladwell, Colin Powell, Patrick Ewing, and Barack Obama. As Taifa hints, when you start handing out checks based on descent from enslaved people, you're implying that other African Americans have not had overcome the legacy of slavery. If the concept of reparation incites enmity, but among different groups of black people, just imagine how much tension it will stoke among other groups. My sense from talking with people who support reparations is that it really isn't about the money. It's about recognition. What they really want is for Americans to acknowledge that blacks have been uniquely oppressed and persecuted in U.S. history. That is not something most Americans would deny. Some small-minded people do, of course, but public policy for the past 70 years has arguably been dominated by debates about how best to remediate the handicaps that have been imposed on African Americans, as well as by resistance to such efforts. 400 years after the first slaves were brought to this land, it remains a painful and difficult subject. I just read David Blythe's Frederick Douglass' Prophet of Freedom. If you want to chill your blood, read Douglass' indictment of American hypocrisy in his speech, What to the Slave is the 4th of July. A former slave himself, Douglass was remarkably one of the nation's severest critics and greatest champions. Julian Castro declares that our country will never truly heal until we address the original sin of slavery. Castro speaks of it as if we didn't fight a crushing civil war, as if we didn't adopt affirmative action in education jobs, the military, banking, housing, and more, as if our entertainment and culture were not drenched in race consciousness, and as if we didn't elect an African American president. In fact, as fans of reparations are slow to recognize, we suffer not from too little, but from too much race consciousness. In the age of Trump, the percentage of whites who say whiteness is important to their identity is rising. There is a cost to pitting Americans against one another in an oppression sweepstakes. Of course, blacks suffer incalculably during slavery and after, but their pain cannot be healed by payments to their descendants any more than dead slave owners can be punished by taxes on their progeny. We cannot cure one injustice by imposing another, even if a far lesser one. And the critics who object that Native Americans, Asians, and others have endured their share of misery are correct. Who will parse exactly how much cash their great or great grandchildren are entitled to? History is too vast and too complicated to allow for tidy accounting of sins and victimization. What we owe to one another is, as Frederick Douglass charged us 167 years ago, to stand by our founding ethos, stand by those principles, be true to them on all occasions, in all places, against all foes, and at whatever cost. Listen, all I'm gonna say is this: cut the goddamn check and stop bullshitting around. I don't give a damn what those other groups have to say. Not even the foreign born ones. They have literally shown they have showed their natural ass this last year, ever since the talk of reparations came up, because they're not directly benefiting. So all this talk about this, that, and the third, stop. We don't want to hear it anymore. That's exactly why 45 is getting back into office. And we don't even have to vote for him. We don't. We know it's going to happen. I will be pleasantly surprised if it doesn't happen. But it is what it is. They can pull out all these studies and everything like that. Notice they always like to do a study when it comes to us. Always. When it comes to us. Of why we don't need this, or why we don't deserve this, or why this talk about reparations is so divisive. They love to bring up divisive a lot lately. And notice they always like to bring up divisive when it comes to us, as if we are the great divide in this establishment. Yet, if you literally look around, if it's because of the white power structure that this establishment is in shambles as we speak. We don't hold policy. We don't control anything. As far as they're concerned, we just exist. But see, they don't want us to get that because they don't want us to have some level of power or some level of control. And these reparations could possibly put us there. Now I have to ask them this: if this was the only way to get the nation out of its extremely mountains of debt, would they do it? Something tells me probably not. They will allow the ship to sink. That's how petty they are. But as far as those foreign born blacks, they can kick rocks somewhere for real. Like I said, they shown their hand. Now we know who we're dealing with. It's literally us against the world. But y'all let me know what y'all think about this down in the comments, and I'll talk to you in the next one.